Hey, it's Baz, filmmaker dad and the guy behind 20 Minute Gamer. I'm in a very wintry mood at the moment. It's dark, it's grey and it's very cold here now in the UK. And after really enjoying the long dark, I found myself wanting to stay in that frozen headspace just a little bit longer. So this time I jumped into Frostpunk. This is a game I've heard talked about for years, but somehow I've never actually played it. And that's partly because this isn't really my usual genre of game. The last time I properly played anything like this was probably Command & Conquer, which was back in the mid-90s. Unless I guess you count Jurassic World Evolution, which I dipped into more recently. Still, Frostpunk feels like the perfect follow-up. It's snow, it's survival, and it's a world on the brink. So the question, as always, is, does it hook me in the first 20 minutes? Story. The opening does a surprisingly good job of setting the tone straight away. You're given a short but effective cutscene which explains that the world has essentially collapsed after a catastrophic storm. Cities have failed, civilization has frozen over, people have fled north in a desperate attempt to survive. You're part of one of those groups, survivors who stumble across a gigantic generator that is buried in the snow, and that generator quickly becomes the heart of everything. Your goal is simple on paper. You turn it on, you keep it running, and you build a city around it so your people don't freeze to death. As a concept, it's really strong. It reminded me a little of Waterworld, but instead of oceans, it's an endless frozen wasteland. There are also shades of The Day After Tomorrow in the scale and hopelessness of it all. Visually, the opening cutscene does a lot of heavy lifting. Massive machines crawling across snowfields, shots from beneath the ice, and a sense that humanity is clinging on by its fingernails. It instantly sold me on the world. For a game like this, you don't actually need a strong narrative hook. The mechanics could easily do the work, but I really appreciated that the developers made the effort to give these people some context. I genuinely wanted them to survive, which matters a lot in a management game like this. Score, 7 out of 10. Controls. I played on mouse and keyboard, and honestly I found it far more intuitive than I expected. There is a lot thrown at you quite early on, menus, systems, tutorials, and at first it does feel a bit overwhelming, but crucially the game is very good at letting you check back in if you forget something. There's tooltips, reminders, menus, it's all there when you need it. Navigating the environment is simple, resources like coal are easy to spot, assigning workers feels logical, and everything is very readable, which I really appreciated given my limited time window. At its core, it's a balancing act. You've got a limited number of people, limited resources, and a generator that must stay running. What surprised me was how rewarding it felt very quickly. Once the generator comes online and you start placing buildings, you can actually see progress. The heat spreads, shelters form, and the beginnings of a city start to take shape. There's also a really smart grid-like layout to how buildings interact with heat, which forces you to plan rather than just plonking things down randomly. By the end of my 20 minutes, I found myself genuinely wanting to continue. That's always a good sign. It felt addictive in a quiet, dangerous way, like one wrong move could undo everything. Score, 8 out of 10. Atmosphere. This was the main reason that I actually played Frostpunk, and thankfully it delivered. The atmosphere is bleak, cold, and quietly oppressive. There's enough environmental detail to really sell the freezing conditions, and the combination of visuals, sound, and pacing constantly reminds you that survival here is fragile. You feel isolated, you feel small, and you do feel responsible. It didn't immerse me quite as deeply as The Long Dark, which is very much built around first-person immersion, but that's not really a fair comparison. What Frostpunk does instead is create a systemic sense of dread. Every decision feels like it could have consequences later. I cared about the city surprisingly quickly, which is probably the highest compliment I can give it. Score, 7 out of 10. Music and sound. Music-wise, I think this is very much a functional soundtrack. There's nothing here I'd rush off to listen to outside the game, and it never really demands your attention, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It sets the tone without distracting you. The sound design is where things work a little better. There's wind, machinery, and subtle ambient effects. All of it helps to sell the cold. That said, I did notice some ambient soundscapes looping after a while, which did slightly break the immersion for me. On the plus side, the UI sounds and interactions feel tactile and satisfying, which is important in a management-heavy game. Overall, competent, effective, but not standout. Score, 5 out of 10. Graphics and style. For a game of this scale, I was really impressed. This isn't a flashy AAA production, but it doesn't need to be. The visual style is cohesive, readable, and thoughtfully designed. Snow effects look great, people leave trails, and the city gradually carves itself into the ice. One thing I did want was the ability to zoom in just a little bit closer. I kept trying to get nearer the people and the buildings and things, but the camera limits stop you from really inspecting things up close. That said, the illustration work deserves a special praise. The character portraits, the UI art, and especially the opening cutscene all share a strong, consistent visual identity, and it's genuinely memorable. It might not blow you away technically, but artistically, this game is very well judged. Score 7 out of 10. Gameplay. In my 20 minutes, I went from absolute zero to something that actually resembled a little stability. I started with nothing but a generator and a group of cold, desperate survivors. From there, I sent teams out to collect coal, metal and wood. I powered up the generator. I began laying out shelters and essential buildings. I unlocked things like hospitals, and I assigned workers and engineers to different roles. The radial design with everything centered around the generator is quite a brilliant choice actually. Heat becomes the currency of survival and every placement decision really matters. What surprised me was how much I achieved in just my 20 minutes. Games like this often take hours before you feel any sense of control, but here I felt like I genuinely established the foundations of a functioning city, all within my 20-minute window. That made the time investment feel really worthwhile, and crucially it made me want to keep playing or come back later. Score 7 out of 10. There wasn't a single dramatic standout moment for me. There was no big twist or disaster or anything like that, but the opening cutscene and overall visual style are what stuck with me the most. That first impression, combined with the illustrated character art throughout the game, really sold the world and stayed with me long after I stopped playing. So is this worth 20 minutes? So I went into Frostpunk expecting to barely scratch the surface in 20 minutes, and I was genuinely surprised. Not only did I get a strong sense of the world and its tone, but I also reached a point where I felt somewhat stable. That's rare for a game like this, and it speaks volumes about how well paced the opening is. If you only ever play Frostpunk for 20 minutes, I'd still say it's actually worth your time. You'll experience a compelling setup, a strong atmosphere, and enough meaningful progress to understand why people love it. And for me, it absolutely made me want to return and eventually dive into the sequel. Final score, 7 out of 10. So I'm curious, did Frostpunk hook you straight away or did it take longer? Did you make better decisions than I did, or did everyone freeze to death in the first 20 minutes? And is Frostpunk 2 worth jumping into next? If you're anything like me, you don't have hours and hours to sink into every game, and that's what this channel is all about, seeing whether a game can hook you in just the first 20 minutes. So if you fancy sticking around for more quick, honest reviews, hit subscribe. It really does help keep my fire going.